Greetings, everyone, and a warm welcome to our second Hidden Home Workers and Fair Labour Association joint webinar. It's lovely to have you all with us today across multiple time zones, and it's really appreciated, to have you joining. I'm Rohan, and I work as a Business and Human Rights Manager at Tradecraft India. Our last webinar was an introductory webinar around the area of home working, and we particularly looked at some of the impacts of COVID-19 on home workers in South Asia, many of which are linked to their hiddenness within value chains as piece rate workers who work from their homes on fashion items and a huge range of other products for both local and global markets. And some of the particular challenges that home workers faced post-COVID are also to do indeed with their lack of recognition, both by government as well as by many businesses who benefit from their work. Today, we will be encountering some interesting perspectives on some of the outcomes for children with home worker parents, and also considering some of the barriers to transparency in supply chains where home workers are present, whether that's in South Asia or in other parts of the world. And then considering some of the steps and approaches that can be constructively taken indeed to overcome some of these barriers and build win-wins across the value chain that serve to improve conditions for home workers, as well as furthering brands' due diligence in line with the UN guiding principles and a range of other appropriate frameworks, both national and indeed international. Some housekeeping points just before we start. You will see that there's a Q&A section, which means that you can obviously ask questions to the panelists, and we please encourage you to do that. There is some time towards the end and indeed earlier where you can ask some questions to the panelists. In the chat section, you will find some Hindi translations at intervals for those who require that, if possible, if you can use the Q&A for fielding questions, that's better. But you could also use the chat if you want to kind of raise any points to any of the panelists. I'm happy to now hand over to Lakshmi Bhatia, who will be moderating the session for us today. She'll be familiar to many of you, and I invite Lakshmi to introduce herself, and she'll take you through the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohan. Am I audible? Yes? Okay, great. Hello, I see some old friends as well as many of the familiar faces from now. Hello, Ines, been a long time. Okay, so welcome everybody to the session today, and we hope we have for you what would be not just an informative session, but something that is reflective and gets us all to think about the state of the vulnerabilities in our supply chains, increasingly so in the last few years and exacerbated by the pandemic of 2020. And as we know, it's always the weakest link which feels the highest pressure. And not surprisingly, these are those workers in the informal parts of the supply chain, particularly the women workers. When women get impacted, it's not just them, but it's their family, it's their children, it's the society at large, which has to actually deal with the ramifications of this. So really, we are very, very happy today. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to introduce myself. I sort of get into this role and forget that piece. I think many of you would know me. My journey with the supply chain started in the mid-90s when I joined Gap as one of their social compliance officers in 1997, and had a long journey with them of nearly 15 years, eventually looking at various parts of the supply chain from an ethical perspective globally. I was also a part of the Ethical Trading Initiative's advisory board for a number of years, and I know some of you from there. I worked for a short stint after that at the Fair Labor Association, and since the last few years, I wear many different hats, advisory hats in the business and human rights field. I've been working closely with Tradecraft since the last 4 years, and I'm working on this project with Rohan and the team. So that's my short intro. Having said all of that, we also have, I must mention this, we also have a network here called the Women in Value Chain, which has a number of organizations within the country that look focused in a focused way on issues of women workers. And there's been a lot of energy and synergy from that group, and Subhadra here is an integral part of it along with some of the others. And we are very happy to see these sort of collaborative, emergence from those spaces. So once again, welcoming all of you. I will now hand over to Ines Kamfar from the Center for Child Rights and Business. Ines, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and talk to us about this very, very interesting piece of research you've done and some very interesting findings that have come, which I think will be important for everybody here. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for having me here on the call, and indeed very nice to see you again, Lakshmi. It's been a very long time. To share a little bit from our researchers, so really quick background on who we are. So the Center for Child Rights and Business is looking at supply chains in particular, and trying to understand how our supply chains and the business we're doing impact children and what impact it has on children's rights. We do that in different commodities, from factories to agriculture, and in the last couple of years have been taking a closer look at how this looks within this often hidden supply chain and this of home workers. And so the idea is that I will share with you guys a little bit from a research that is now about 1.5 years old, but I still think I'm very accurate and or very interesting to talk about. And I'm looking forward for all the discussions and to answer any questions that you might have. So to jump right in it, this research, we've done that in a range of countries because we wanted to understand. Generally, we still feel that, although it's been, I think, in our intention for a couple of years, we all know they're home workers. It's coming, has its waves and coming up and down, but we felt that we know very little on how that home worker settings impacts children and children's rights. And that was our main focus on it. I've picked a couple of slides out of that study. The study is available on our website if anyone has questions, so you can read the full report. We managed to talk to 579 home workers who in total have nearly 1,000 children. We did 37 interviews, very in-depth interviews with working children. We did another 50 interviews with children of home workers who were not necessarily working. And we also looked a little bit into, we did some interviews with companies of whom we know that home workers are in their supply chain. I will not focus on those results of the companies so much, more around the home workers themselves. As you can see, the majority of respondents were female, obviously, as it is a very female-driven industry. And I'm going to talk quite a bit around what is meant for the women and for the children to be in this home worker setting. And so one of the key findings we had was the number one reason for home workers to choose home-based work is because the women said it allows me to take care of my children. And it was actually, I think, really fascinating to see how, for many, this was such a positive enabling an empowering situation was the fact that they can be around their children much more than if they were going to work somewhere else, but also obviously because they often can stay in their homes or in their villages where they have families, etc. And you have this this quote here on that site that is somehow, so I just try to arrange but it seems to never work, covered by the pictures, but of this home-based workers who just talks about how much more time she can spend with children, with her children. Now, one thing that I do want, obviously, as we looked at children, and as I'm going to talk quite a bit, as you will see, around the positive impact of homework, I do want to call out, we obviously looked also what it means in terms of how many children get involved into child labor in these settings. And there is clearly, that's clearly one of the risks in home worker settings. And this study has supported that. Now, our sample is not necessarily representative, because it's as you can imagine, when you look for home worker communities, then you get to the ones that you somehow have access to, either because they've been in a program with an NGO. Nest, for example, has supported us in giving access to home workers, so they already were in some programs, or because some of the brands that we've been working with knew of the home workers. So these home workers already had a lot of times some support, some sort of interventions. And so the rate of children being involved in work was around 19%. And interestingly, that was very close to the answers we got from the kids themselves, where it was 19.6%. That's, so I don't think we should take this as like a global, it's spam over a couple of countries, etc., but it's not a representative sample. But these, so about close to 20% of the children that we talked to and that we saw were involved in the work at home, obviously having a big impact on them. And of those who helped their parents, they all clearly said that they started to help them very early. 60% started before they turned 12 years old. So there is clearly that challenge that if homework is at home, if it's in family, it allows the women, as we're going to talk a little bit more, to be more with their children. But there is also a challenge that children are more involved in work throughout. And I just thought it's important to kind of take that to start with. On the other hand, and I'm going to not too much dive into the child labor risk. If during Q&A we want to talk a little bit more, then we can talk about that and more. What was really interesting is that when we looked at what impact does being a home worker child or a child in a home worker household have on education, we could actually see that it seemed to have a positive impact on their school enrollment, meaning that fewer kids of home workers are dropping out of school than would be generally the case in those countries. So if you look at those numbers, so the dropout rate that we had in our sample for kids under 15 was 16.9%, but the national secondary school enrollment is only 67%. So that would leave us with nearly the double, with 33% of kids that are out of school. And this was only half in those home worker settings. Despite the fact that the home worker settings in the Bangladesh context were by far the most difficult ones. We had the kind of one of the harshest situations for the home workers themselves. We had most of the child labor in these communities. And even there, so even under these very difficult circumstances, we could see this clear positive kind of impact, or positive relation at least, towards the school rates. Same thing in Myanmar, where it's 20.3%, but if you look at the national secondary school enrollment rate, it's about 64%. So clearly less children dropping out of school than would be the average. So that for us was a really interesting result. And talking to the parents during these interviews, which I was really lucky to be part of quite a few of them, it got really so evident that this was part because most of these families had very clear structures. Homework, for example, was a clear time in the day for most of the families, and the mothers who were working as home workers were there to kind of supervise that. And we also interestingly saw that there was no, for the home worker children, if they were involved in work, just generally that question, not yet getting into how much and how long, their involvement in work, so helping their parents, did not have a significant negative impact on their school enrollment either. So it wasn't that if kids helped their parents for a couple of hours a day, that meant that they would drop out of school. But that stayed actually very, very stable. But particularly so for the kids that were helping their parents occasionally. And I just want to add to that, we did meet kids who were really working children not going to school, and obviously the moment that there's involvement in work goes beyond an occasional helping, it's a very different story. It's also a very different story of those children that we met that worked in somebody else's household, not in their own parents' household, but somebody else's, and were kind of given to these other families to do the work, where it was clear situations of exploitation and abuse. But for those children who helped their parents occasionally, it did not have a negative impact on their school enrollment. And then another really interesting point is that, and here we actually were able to compare some of the data to the same questions that we had, or data that we had from factories, and that was the case for Vietnam and Bangladesh. And so we could see that, for example, in the Vietnamese home workers, 64% said that they felt that they had enough time for their children. 32% said mostly, but not always. And only 4% said, no, I do not have enough children. Whereas for the factory workers, there were like 53.9% who said mostly, but not always. So clearly, and only 33 felt, yes, I do have enough children. And a very similar picture in Bangladesh. So clearly from the workers' perspective, the factory workers felt that they were falling short on spending time with their children and investing in their education, whereas the majority of the home workers felt that they had found a good way to look after their children. And this also had an impact on how much time children spent without adult supervision. Here we didn't have the exact data to compare with factories, but we compared the home workers to the workshop workers. So these workshops were still very small. Sometimes we also refer to them as homework, but these were workplaces where the workers would go to. So they wouldn't stay in their own home. And we could clearly see, if you look at this table, that the time or the percentage of children who are left alone nearly every day is much lower for home workers. It's 6.8%. It's nearly the double for the workshop workers. And this is the same pattern we can actually see for parents with children under the age of 6. So being a home worker clearly means that parents are around the children and they're able to look after them, creating this positive impact on school enrollment and engagement. It also has an interesting, very positive impact on breastfeeding. So when we asked the children who had, the women who had children under 2, whether they were currently breastfeeding, we had 84%. 0.6% in Bangladesh who said, yes, we are. And the same question in the factory survey, that was down to under 60%. And the similar trend looking at how long they're breastfeeding, which was significantly longer for home-based workers and small workshop workers. And in particular, those home-based workers who were able to take leave, they're the like those who were able to take leave had fairly long times of breastfeeding. It's recommended by many organizations to go up to two years, and actually the average is nearly on that 2 years level. So very positive impact in terms of breastfeeding times amongst the home workers. And yeah, so these are a couple of numbers from this 37 working children that we met during that survey, and there so these were kids that were really working quite significantly in the households, not just helping out once in a while. And we can see that if that is the case, that is obviously an ongoing risk as the children start very early. Some of them started under 12 years old, and many started under 15 years old. And we then also saw, though, that when they are like those who are still in school are working around an average of under 12, they work around an average of 2 hours per day. The 12 to 14 years old is 4.2 hours by ILO standards. That's already too much. They should, if this is light work, they should maximum work 2 hours a day. It didn't increase so much for those kids who stay in school. They, even when they were 15 to 17, the hours didn't increase significantly. But obviously, the moment they drop out of school, we've seen kids with very, very long hours. And we've seen really situations of exploitations in these situations for kids. And as I mentioned before, the worst was basically for those kids who were not staying at their homes. So having children from other families in home worker households that support seems to be a bit of a red flag, as we've seen. That's where we had a lot of the issues. And again, just one of the kind of, let's say, challenges so we have all these positive impacts on breastfeeding, education, etc. But we also still have that really big challenge that for many of the families in home worker settings are unable to cover basic expenses. And so the rates and the piece rate for which they're working are not sufficient for them to get to a decent living standard. I'm going to jump this one. We've also seen that situations that some of those risks that I just mentioned around both child labor, about insufficient pay, they were then further aggravated when workers were in bad health and safety conditions that also had a lot of negative impact on their health. Interestingly, where we had transparent links to supply chains and global supply chains, those situations were much better. And for the other workers, so the red line that you can see, that's very new. These workers are working for global supply chains, and the buyers are aware of those workers and have maybe not necessarily visited, but there is some transparency, there is some information going on between that level of supply chain to the buyer. The blue line is where we have indications that their goods are going into this global supply chain through the middleman that we talk to, etc. But they're not aware of each other. So that's the hidden one where nobody knows. It could be, it's likely, but we're not sure. And both the workers as well as the buyers in this case would not be aware of the link that they're having through their production. And these home workers, without having that link, just fared lower on all levels of health and safety assessments that we did. And just I wanted to add that slide to kind of indicate to what level of transparency and obviously showing those linkages to supply chains can be helpful. So very quickly, so there's clear benefits for children and women that we've seen. The breastfeeding is longer. There's their children are left home alone much like fewer times, and they stay in school longer. This can be somehow offset, the risks can be offset if the homework is happening in a proper environment and with decent wages. And this positive impact of homework seems stronger where we have this visibly, or where home workers are visibly integrated in supply chains, which I think is a very encouraging results for all of us who are trying to find solutions. So I'll probably leave it here. I think that's probably for today the most significant kind of results to mention. I hope I didn't talk too long, and I'm looking forward for the discussions.
Thank you, Ines. No, I think that was perfect. It was important what you had to say. And you are okay with this presentation being shared by anybody who would be interested in having that?
Yes.
If that is, yes. So if that is the case, please get in touch with the Tradecraft team and you can have more of, because when you look at data and statistics, sometimes you need to sort of go deeper. But thank you, you did a fantastic job. Very, very important piece of research, which validates a lot of things that others are finding working with home workers too. So thank you, Ines. We'll come back to you. With that, I'd like to invite Sarah Brennan from Pentland. Sarah, if you could quickly introduce yourself and take over from here. Thank you so much for being the brand representative in this, one of the brand representatives in this conversation.
So hi everyone, thank you for having me here today. I'm Sarah Brennan and I'm the Positive Business Director at Pentland. I'm just going to talk you through the homeworking project that we undertook, just so that we can share the challenges and learnings with you from a brand perspective. So it's great to be here, so thank you. If we move to the next slide, I'll just get going. So Pentland Brands is the name behind some of the world's best loved sports, outdoor and lifestyle brands. And our portfolio includes names such as Speedo, Berghaus and LS. That's the intro to Pentland over. So let's go to the next slide, please. So following from the publishing of the Stitching Our Shoes report, Pentland as a brand, we wanted to understand more about homeworking in our supply chain. We knew that we had some homeworking, but if I'm honest, we didn't know enough about it to get a grasp on it and what we should be doing, but also what good would look like. So we saw this as an opportunity to partner with experts such as Homeworkers Worldwide and Cividep to hopefully make a change. I think it's important to acknowledge that homeworking in your supply chain exists if it does, because by trying to ignore it or hide it, it only encourages other suppliers to also cover it up. So we knew that by being more transparent about our supply chain, ultimately would help our homeworkers. Let's just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll just talk about the different stages of our project, but essentially it covered scoping homeworking in our supply chain, developing a policy, doing some value chain mapping, stakeholder interviews, a review of our purchasing practices, and then a remediation plan. I just want to make you aware as well that our homeworking policy is available on our website, and Pentland are really happy for others to have access to it. If you are a brand who's starting on your homeworking journey, it can be a good starting point to read other brands' policies, because it can just help you to think about what you might want to include in your own. Let's just go to the next slide, please. I think with projects in brand supply chains, it can be easy to overlook the benefits to the brand. I think a lot of the time we often think about the benefits it will bring to the supply chain, but I just wanted to highlight the worth and benefits to the brand, because it can really help with that internal business case about doing something. So we found that through this project, there were actually benefits to Pentland as well as to the home workers. There was an opportunity for us to see and understand conditions beyond first tier in a country that we source in. We're able to evidence the ability to engage well with key stakeholder groups. I think it gave us better cultural awareness and sensitivity. And I think we really learned about that importance of third-party impartiality, especially when working in projects in something where we weren't the experts in. And I think through that, we learned a lot more about what it was about home working, and we gained more experience in that as well. So there were some benefits to Pentland as well. So next slide, please. So I've just taken a picture from our policy, and in this slide, this is the wording that we have in our policy. And I wanted to show you it so you can understand that as a brand, we have very clear expectation for suppliers to identify and improve home working. We found that having it clear in the policy is helpful so suppliers know what the brand is requesting of them. And also when it's in a policy, it actually helps embed and enforce good practice. So next slide, please. And although there were many benefits, there were also lots of challenges that the brand and the project team had to overcome. For us, so again, some insight was that we recommend working with a trusted or long-standing supplier. It generally makes engagement easier, especially if this is a pilot or an area of work that you haven't done before. And another reflection is that we were very lucky to have a team in country. This really made a difference so that we used that team. And I think it's regardless of what their role is, they can be really helpful. We don't actually have a corporate responsibility team in the country of this project, but we did have sales and commercial and supply chain people, and they were really helpful in implementing a project. So don't feel that that has to be a barrier, not having dedicated in-country resource in corporate responsibility. I think because there is a reluctance from many brands to acknowledge home working, suppliers do try and hide it, and it's often out of fear. And maybe because of this fear, we also find that some suppliers may be resistant to working with NGOs. And so it does take some time to build trust. So I think it's important to factor this in, this time that it might take, and that initial buy-in from suppliers does take time. But it's important not to shy away from that, because if homework in our supply chains exists, it's really important that we work with those suppliers to really build that relationship and that trust together. So go to the next slide, please. So just want to share a couple of examples from the project which are practical that we found useful, and hopefully you will too. So we really recommend introducing a job card system. Job cards were aware that both the agent and the home worker could record and sign the number of pairs allocated, the agreed piece rate, and wages paid. It gave us as a brand a paper trail so that we can help with any queries that come up. And I've included a photo so you can see the exact type of job card we had. It's simple, but it's effective. And we actually recommend not overcomplicating the record keeping part. I think the easier it is, the more it will be used. So that's just another sharing from us. Next slide, please. And going back to our policy, this is again is a snapshot from our policy to show that we embedded record keeping into it. We find that it gives us better leverage, and again, having that clear responsibility and expectations for suppliers is really clear, because then there's no doubt about what you expect of them. So next slide, please. Also, mapping the value chain we found really important, as without the data you can't make informed decisions. And this is where we found that partnering with people like Cividep and home workers worldwide was really vital, to be honest. It also gave us that feeling that we weren't operating alone, and we were able to utilize the skill sets that they have that we didn't have in our business, especially for interviewing stakeholders. So really recommend that partnering and collaboration is really key to do a good project as well. So next slide, please. So as home workers are paid by piece, it's difficult to establish a rate of pay. So we focus on a specific order and documented everything in relation to that order: the piece rates, the transport of materials by agents, quality control, etc. And through carrying out a time and motion study, we could calculate piece rate for the home working, linking it to minimum wage rates. As we had that data, we could then map prices paid end to end, and we knew we could afford to raise piece rates and easily manage impact on product price. So again, this is just showing that where you have that data, it can really help you as a brand to make those decisions and to work with your supply chain better. Just next slide, please. So as mentioned, we did this comprehensive value chain mapping, and this involved interviews with suppliers, agents, and home workers. And there was really great learning from this. And so again, I can't emphasize enough that collaboration is really key to do this well. Next slide, please. And we recommend as well following up to check the effectiveness of a project. It can be easy as a brand to sometimes do a project and then it's ended and then walk away from it. It's really important that you check that it's been effective and it's still in use within your business. So we found that through this project, home workers had seen their piece rate rise by around 30%, and that the job card system was still being used effectively. So next slide, please. So to conclude, through our experience, we recommend partnering with those who have the expertise that you may lack. We really welcome anyone to look at our home working policy, which is publicly available, and learn from it. And also there's some fantastic tools out there on Home Workers Worldwide website. They have a toolkit. And all of the different NGOs and groups who are out there working in this area, we really do recommend that if you're a brand who's wanting to do something, that you reach out to them as well. So thank you, and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll take questions after one more presentation that was brilliant, to the point, and very helpful. So I think most important, demystified, the entire issue into simple manager steps, and talk about the importance of collaboration, which I think if you have the right partners in place, it really, really helps. So thank you very much for that. And I hope this inspires more brands to, move out of that comfort zone and into, the lower tiers of the supply chain. And so we'll continue to look for more experience sharing from you. Thank you very much again. With that, I invite Momita Chakravarti from Seva West Bengal. Momita, we'll do this slightly differently. I'm going to put 3 questions to her and she's going to share her experiences to those questions. But before that, Momita, if you could just introduce yourself briefly, and then I'll ask you the questions.
Sure, thank you. Lakshmi and others panelists and attendees. I am Momita Chakraborty. I am working with Seva for last 4 years. But more than last 10 years, I have been working with the women's rights issues. And with the Seva, I am working with home-based workers, mainly weavers and beady workers in West Bengal, state of India.
Is there an audio issue or is it at my end?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better. Sorry, I missed the last part, Momita. You said 10 years you've been working on worker rights issues, and then I missed
Women's
the
rights
last part.
issues.
Women's rights issues, yes.
Okay, yes. And for last more than 4 years, actually, I'm working with Seva, especially with home-based workers in the state of West Bengal of India. And we are working in 3 districts of West Bengal with the home-based workers. Lakshmi,
Hi there, Momita.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, I think there's a problem with. I think there's a problem with Lakshmi's audio.
I'm back. I'm back. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just give me a moment. I've just had to log in, through my mobile. So just give me a second while I get on to the questions. But I do remember the first question. So Momita Ben, if you can hear me, very often brands only look at sort of, the product price and the profit motive, primarily. In many cases, what has been your experience in Seva West Bengal? Can you mention some of the brands you've been working with and what your story has been with them?
Okay, here in Seva West Bengal, we are working with some brands working with the weavers, especially Ellen Fisher brands. And Seva West Bengal has been working with this brand in Fulia. This is a district of West Bengal for more than last 4 years to create a more equitable and transparent global supply chain. This partnership is a prime example of how brands and communities can work together to improve the supply chain for all of the stakeholders. Through the partnership, Seva and the brands have created a transparent supply chain. The government's company sources products directly from the Seva weavers in Fulia. By connecting the brand and the producers, the company has direct insight into the conditions of the producers, and the weavers are able to prevent value from being extracted by middlemen and contractors. Seva also facilitates meetings with the weavers, middlemen, and brands. These conversations allow for open dialogue and accountability between stakeholders in the supply chain. Initially, it was very difficult for us because the weavers were scared to lose their job, but the situation now has changed. Now the weavers are enough confident to discuss their issues with the master weavers to solve their problems. Seva also provides employment demanded training on topics such as designing and marketing, as well as industry, such as workplace safety and financial planning. SEWA leads workshops and information campaigns on labor rights issues. By providing producers with this information, weavers are able to demand and advocate for better wages and working conditions. SEWA's workshops, training sessions, trade meetings, and community initiatives are led by and designed for the women weavers. SEWA's efforts not only improve women's economic standing, but also leadership within the local industry by overcoming systematic barriers.
Right. That is wonderful. I know SEWA has a record of doing that now for many decades. My question to you is, one, what were some of the key challenges when you started working with the brands? And then related to that, what did you do to protect workers and create a collectivized movement on behalf of the workers? So if you could just take the brand part of the question first, what were some of the challenges to bring the brands on board?
Okay, when we have started working with the brands, actually we face some challenges. Like we observed actually that the weavers are not getting proper wages, and the master weavers or the sub-master weavers did not maintain bookkeepings. So weavers are not aware actually about their wages and which brand they are involved with for their productions. So this was a gap between the weavers and the brand. They don't have any idea about their weavers, and weavers don't have any idea about their brands. So SEWA ensured that weavers are protected in local supply chains. Weavers in this area supply hand-woven products like stoles, saris to the local and the state economy. So to create more market linkages, SEWA provides more opportunities for the weavers to sell their products by organizing trade fairs. And SEWA also connects weavers to government-run fairs. And SEWA conduct meeting with the brands. When the brands people come in Fulia, SEWA can arrange the meeting so that both of them know each other. Many weavers are unaware about their social security rights, so SEWA that they are entitled to, including subsidies, trade production schemes. SEWA provides information and access to welfare schemes to improve the wages and health through community centers. SEWA ensures the sustainability of its programs by creating community leaders called Agewans. Agewans identify the community issues and lead solutions. They address their issues to their master weavers, and now they are able to address their issues and solve their problems.
Thank you, Momita. So it's very, very clear that where they are brought together and, the capacity development happens, there is a greater direct linkage to the market. The brands are educated and the workers are educated on sort of the requirements of each other. There is a whole ecosystem that is created, and that helps for this transparency and development to take place. So my last question to you is, we saw this so clearly everywhere, how people got, the workers, migrant workers, other workers, particularly women workers, got impacted so much during the pandemic. What were some of the steps you took to support the women in and the weavers in your collective?
Okay. COVID has presented unprecedented challenges for the local weavers. From February 2020, the export companies stopped to give orders. During the lockdown, the weavers did not have work. After restrictions were lifted, SEWA started providing training for women weavers to use digital platforms to sell their products. Some weavers opened a page at Instagram to sell their own products. So now they are able to handle digital platform, to use their digital platform. SEWA also created an online store named Anubandh to help weavers to sell their product, and is leading a petition to the state government for free rations for all. Through this way, actually, we are working with weavers so that they can handle the situation and they can get back their work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we will now, without any further delay, move into the Q&A section. Rohan, I'm going to ask your help here because I can't see this very clearly on my mobile. So can we start taking the questions? I know there's something from Dave, something from Giselle, and I saw something from Sonakshi earlier. So if you could just, help with the questions and direct it to whoever it's meant to, that would be great.
Sure. So Sandra from Arissa has a question for Ines. She commented that it's good to see that most working children are still in school. Can you explain how you collected this data? Have you also looked at school attendance registers? I'll just run through the questions and we can probably take them all at once. There's a question from Sonakshi at HNSA about whether the households have other sources of income as well, or all income was from home-based work, and I suspect that's also to Ines. So maybe if you can also take that, Ines. There's a question also from Dietrich Weinbrenner around how you bridge the gap between minimum wages and living wages. I think that might be for Sarah, but maybe Lakshmi, you can field that. There's a question also from Elizabeth from Community for Social Change and Development, who has asked whether the brand suggested or whether they asked for the job card to be given to the supplier, I think, for the home worker. I think that's the question. So was there an ask from the brand, or did the ask basically, come from someone else? And there are a number of questions that have been answered.
Rohan, maybe we can,
maybe
we can take the answers for these many questions and then sort of, see. We don't have too much of time, but yeah, let's take these answers. So maybe we start with Ines. Ines, do you remember your questions, or do you want us to read that out to you?
I think I see them also, at least part. At least one of them. Yeah. So thanks for the question. So first time so all the data that we covered was through on-site interviews, kind of face-to-face with the home workers. We did it before COVID, so that was easy. We did not look into school registry. I mean, the official data we obviously have from the official government sites, and then for the children involved, that's based on the answers that we got and the observations that we made. So that comes directly from the children and their parents. So that's the first question. And then the second question around other income. Yes, so we did look. So when we looked at the questions whether or not they have enough to live from, or where they have issues, or what areas they cannot cover in their income, we always looked at their entire income. It depends. Generally, another distinction that I didn't talk about today was that we saw that in urban areas, the life for home workers was definitely much harder because they were often exclusively dependent on the income from their homework, and they did not have any other resources or any kind of plan Bs, also if orders were low, etc. Whereas in the rural areas, generally most of the home workers had much more resources to fall back on. Many had their own gardens, so there was additional food coming in from there, etc. So generally, the risk throughout and on all levels, from child labor to health and safety issues to insufficient wages, was much greater for urban workers than it was for rural home workers. So that was another kind of result of the survey.
Great, thanks. Sarah, we'll come to you now. So if you could just take your questions, and then we'll come to Momita after that.
Yeah, so I think I've answered some in the chat, but why don't I go through the ones again, just so it's clear. So the first one was asked around the roles of CIVADEP and home workers worldwide. We actually have Lucy Brill, who basically ran this project. So maybe it would be a good one for Lucy to answer.
I mean, I think it was very much a partnership approach. But I mean, I mean, we're based in the UK. Cividep are based in Tamil Nadu. Well, they're based in Bangalore, but they had staff in Tamil Nadu. So I think there was a division of labour. I mean, we brought the experience from other groups of workers' organisations working on home working. So we brought lessons and best practice ideas. And we also led on the liaison, I think, with Pentland and kind of overall project management coordination, where Cividep led on the work on the ground in Tamil Nadu. So that was engaging with the supplier, engaging with the agents, interviewing the different stakeholders, and then also crucially engaging with the home workers, organising focus groups and interviews with them. I think in terms of writing up and the recommendations, that was something we did together. So yeah, and I think, I could also, there was a question about the job card. I was just trying to remember how that happened. I'm sure we recommended transparency systems in the first we did the first stage of the research when there wasn't at that point any systems at all. But I think then it was something that the actual practicalities of how you did that was something that the supplier and Pentland's local staff worked up between them in terms of actually how they were going to do it in that context.
Thanks, Lucy. And Lucy, you'll hear more from Lucy very shortly. Yes. Sarah, anything else that you'd like to add on before we move on to Momita?
Yeah, I think there's a really important question about bridging the gap between minimum wages and living wages. I've put a bit of a quick text response in there, but being very transparent, there's still a long way to go, and it is about a continuous improvement. I think getting home working to minimum wage is an important step, but it's not the end. And I think as an industry, this goes beyond just home working, but the whole entire apparel industry. Getting to that living wage is really key. One thing that we're working in with members as a member of ACT is our purchasing practices to help us with that. So we're actually rolling that out this year, and a large part of that ACT work is how we isolate labour costing and protect that. And so that's what we're looking at for the whole of our supply chain. But then, there will still need to be a look at how we do that with the home working lens as well. So it's a big piece of work, and we're not there yet, if I'm honest. And I think even though we're proud to get there to minimum wage, it's definitely not something that we should be jumping up and down in celebration of, because there is ultimately a long way to go with that as well.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you make a very key point. I think, the wages issues is so contentious that usually brands are very, very wary of even touching it. But I think what's important, the learning from your experience and some of the others is that this is all about continuous improvements, and you've got to tackle it and see, how you can keep pushing along, plugging along, bringing others along, because, the economics is not really controlled by any one actor, and which is why, again, having multiple stakeholders engaging at different levels, all of this has an impact in terms of the actual wages that a home worker brings, bringing in more transparency in the supply chain, plugging a lot of leakages, because some of these supply chains have a lot of hidden leakages which come at a cost. And when brands really begin to look at what their supply chain down the tiers looks like, they're able to address some of these issues and actually create efficiencies that can then translate into direct impact, positive impact for the workers. So I think what's important is to not shy away from looking at the issue and continuing to engage with others who've started their journey a little earlier. So thank you once again. Momita, would you like to add something? And Rohan, did we ask the questions? I'm so sorry, I'm talking from my mobile, so I can't really see clearly, but did we ask Momita any questions that came her way, or would you like to sort of share any questions at this point?
There was just that question around the whether the brand suggested for the job card, or whether that was suggested by someone else. So right. If Momita or Sarah want to kind of add any points on that, we could sure. Quickly perhaps do so.
Yeah, I think Lucy covered that in her response, but it was essentially, home workers worldwide recommended that we have some way of documenting, some way of system of doing that, and then that practicality on the ground kind of came through the project, working with the local teams in country and the supplier. So it's definitely something which, that top-down direction, that needing to do something and then kind of organically working on the ground as to how that is best suited. And for us, this is what worked for us.
Momita, would you like to add anything? I know SEVA has great systems which started way back, almost 50 years ago. So my sense is it's an extension of what, SEVA practices in its various communities. But anything quickly you'd like to add in terms of the job cards, and was it the brands who required it, or just by virtue of working with SEVA, that is a given?
Thank you for giving me these questions, actually. In fact, when we have started working 4 years back in Fulia, that time we've observed that only male members of the family have this weaver's identity card. Women are not recognized as weavers, and they did not have any identity card. So after advocacy with the government, SEVA actually forced government, SEVA and their members actually forced government to organize again census. And it was possible in 2017-18, the handloom department organized census, and 1990, end of 18 and 90, almost 7,000 women members received their identity cards. Now they are actually access their rights, their entitlements as a weavers. So we have done this in Fulia block. So because without identity cards or job card as a weavers, they are not able to get their facilities, entitlements from the government.
Absolutely. And we saw this in various studies we undertook after the pandemic, that if you don't have the identity, you can't access whatever is coming through the governmental system. So thank you. Thank you, all of you, for this session. And of course, we're always short of time, aren't we, when we get into issues like this. But let me move on quickly to Lucy. Lucy, you've been a backbone of so many such projects and the work around home workers. If you could quickly introduce yourself and go into your presentation.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today, and it's great to join this panel with this really excellent group of speakers. And thank you also to FLA for the opportunity to be here today. So my name is Lucy Brill. I work for an NGO called Home Workers Worldwide, based in the UK. I think you've heard a little bit about our work today from Sarah's presentation. But I'm going to talk today about some work that we're doing with the Hidden Home Workers Project, which is led by Tradecraft India and also involves HomeNet South Asia and a different bit of SEWA funded by the European Community. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so really this is just the challenge, I think, that we're all facing, and that this seminar is really designed to hopefully give you some inspiration and some ideas of ways forward to how to ensure that human rights due diligence extends beyond first-tier factories. So this little infographic really is just showing some of the complexity that I'm sure brand members will be very familiar with, but brands, suppliers, subcontractors, and then home workers right at the end, and the complicated relationships between different suppliers and different subcontractors. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so today the presentation really is talking about some research we've been doing within Hidden Home Workers to produce a toolkit. This is basically started with some research, some interviews with 15 leading practitioners that are working with home workers. I'm proud to say Ines was one of the people we spoke to. Other people on this panel, the learning from the Pentland project also really fed into this project. And really what this research is looking at, what kind of approaches have been tried to improve home working within global supply chains, and can we learn the lessons from other people's experience and pull together the good practice into a toolkit that is then going to be made available on the internet that anyone can use. So today we're launching the research report, but I guess before we go further into the detail from the research, I think a question really that needs to be addressed really is, how important is this within, I mean, if we're doing human rights due diligence of supply chains, we're really aware that you're facing all sorts of competing demands and priorities. And it's just, I think just taking a little step back and looking at some of the figures around home working can maybe help us to think to prioritize this issue. So really, I mean, the ILO, the latest stats from the International Labour Organization, found that 8% of workers, and this was pre-COVID, I think many more workers now are working from home, but 8% of workers, 11% of women workers work in their own homes. Estimates of home working in India, there's 37 million home workers in India across a range of different sectors. 28% of women of a female labour force within Pakistan work from home. And 3.5 million, there are estimated to be 3.5 million home workers actually producing for global chains of apparel and footwear brands. That's just within India alone. And I think it's also important just to say that this is not just in South Asia. This is, you know, in the work that we've been doing with different brands. We've been asking brands to map supply chains, to have conversations with suppliers about home working, and brands have reported home workers in countries including China, Vietnam, Italy, and even in the UK. So and it is something that is found within many different supply chains. Okay, next slide, please. So turning now really to the research that I mentioned. The first thing we were looking for, what were the barriers to transparency around home working? So here we identified 3 key issues. I mean, first of all, suppliers feeling unwilling to admit that there were home workers. And I think that is very much reflecting a fear that home working, that brands won't want them to be using home workers. They may then lose orders. Also, uncertainty about how to deal with home working, how to manage it responsibly, and fear of the possible increased cost that might involve. The next key issue is the weak position of women home workers within supply chains. And these would be home workers that are not in the kind of supply chains that Ines was talking about, where they were recognised by the brand, but in the majority of situations where home workers are not recognised by the brand, not acknowledged as workers, and they're largely unorganised, and they're often a long way, they may be in villages a long way away from the factory. I think underlying the supplier's reluctance to disclose is really oftentimes mixed messages. We do know that many brands ban home working. They effectively say to their suppliers, we don't allow home working in our supply chains. Or if they don't actually explicitly ban it, they give out the messages that that's not a good idea. And suppliers want to get orders, and so they're in a way they're going to tell brands what they want to hear. So could I have the next slide, please? So this little infographic really is just trying to unpack a little bit more about on the left hand side. We've got what we call the cycle of denial. So if brands have a ban on home working, that means effectively that of course suppliers are going to tell brands and auditors that they don't use home workers. They're not going to say, if they know that they're not allowed to, they're not going to admit to it being there, even if it is there. And that actually has a negative impact on the home workers as well, because it makes it even more difficult for home workers to speak out and take action. I mean, home workers are almost always informally employed and very concerned about the risk of losing their work. And as a result, it is difficult for them to challenge or to raise their voices. But I think that cycle of concealment makes it even harder. So what we are encouraging brands to do is to recognise that home workers may be present within supply chains. It's not saying they're in every supply chain, but to sort of to recognise that might be the case. And also to recognise that is a legitimate way of organising production in certain supply chains. and by doing that, by acknowledging that, by having a clear policy within your supplier handbook or as a separate piece of paper, whatever way is useful, that gives suppliers permission to disclose that either they or one of their suppliers, their subcontractors, may be using home workers. And then once things are disclosed, we can begin to look at what's going on and to work together to address it and to begin to improve transparency and also improve working conditions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just to say a little bit more about that, the brand home worker policy, first of all, recognition, but obviously involve committing a commitment from the brand to work together with suppliers to address the situation and to improve, and also to involve home workers in that process. I think this works best when there is strong mutual relationships with the supplier. When you've got, I mean, I think one of the strengths of the case study that we heard from Sarah is that they had been sourcing from that supplier for many years, and it was a stable relationship. This was a product that was a core part of Pentland's offer, and so there was an element of trust, and that is really useful and really helpful to give incentives to the supplier to invest in making changes. I think another really helpful thing is having somebody on the ground. I think, as we mentioned, home workers may be some distance away from the factory. They also often need or respond best to contact from local community organisations. There may be language barriers. So actually having the opportunity to work with a local partner is really important, is often a really important thing. And then also not forgetting that if there is an opportunity to liaise with a home worker organisation or work towards establishing such a thing so that home workers themselves can be involved going forward, then that's really important too. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is really just to touch. We asked, I think there was a lot of interest in the potential for IT and digital solutions. We included this within the research. To date, we didn't find anything that was actually working with home workers thus far, though I know that there are various pilot projects ongoing at the moment. I think, and the ILO, I think, has done is the most furthest forward. They've done some work with using Facebook and Zoom. I think there's an important kind of cautionary, the practicalities of making digital solutions work. I think it's really important that home workers can use the digital technology as well as the brand and supplier. But that obviously has important questions about whether or not home workers have access to smartphones, electricity to charge them up with, a signal. So there are obviously concerns. I think different groups of home workers, it may be more feasible opportunities. I know we were doing some work with home workers where most of their husbands were migrant workers. They had a much higher take up of mobile phones and Facebook just because they were using it to keep in touch with their partners. So I think it's not to say it can't work, but I think it is really important to make sure that it's used to build transparency in both directions. So for the supplier to track product, but also for the home worker to report back and to get help if they need that help. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry, I'm really aware that I'm kind of rushing through this, but we can come back to things in the Q&A if necessary. So again, this is just a summary really of some of the key lessons that came out of that research. And in the toolkit, we are hoping to assemble and make more widely available the practical tools that people have used to improve transparency. So I think Sarah mentioned the job card system. So other places people have established a register of home workers. So there's a range of different tools, kind of contract for the agents as well. It's really important to map their contribution to supply chains. So a range of different tools that will be made available. And I mean, I would encourage brands to get in touch with us. We can share prototypes of some of these at the moment if people need them. Another key lesson really is that this process does take time. It's a process of trust building. The partner, the brand partner, the supplier, the other stakeholders in that supply chain, with the agents, the home workers, the NGO partner on the ground, possibly also a specialist home worker NGO partner like ourselves. All that kind of process, people need to get to know each other, need to build up that trust. And I think that was a really important process with the Pentland project and with other projects. So the vital importance of having somebody on the ground, a credible local CSO partner, and also commercial staff from the brand can also be really helpful. But also a commitment to working together, to looking for solutions. I think for us, the issue around the home worker policy as the key to opening the way forward is really important. But I think also collaborative approaches opens up a space for multi-stakeholder initiatives. I think in order for these things to be sustainable, precisely because the slide that we showed at the beginning with the different linkages between people, oftentimes a home worker may be producing for more than one brand or more than one supplier. And so therefore, if groups of suppliers can work in a particular area, that could be really helpful. That's a way of making this much more sustainable. Okay, go on, next slide, please. Okay, I think I'm just going to skip through these two slides. These are really just showing what will be in the toolkit. So the different steps in what due diligence looks like. And then this is the key resources in the toolkit at the moment. Next slide, please. So this is some example contracts for subcontractors, model passbook. That's another word for job card system. Model contract for home workers. And then this really is trying to pull this all together. So this is what's step-by-step approach for brands, depending on where they are in the chain. Yeah. So if you're just starting out, having some kind of policy on home working, a recognition that home working has a place in your supply chain, but then mapping your supply chain, bringing the policy to attention of suppliers, beginning that conversation, mapping the supply chain, drawing up action points, and then rolling out. You're working together and rolling out good practice. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? This is just really say a little bit more about some of the things that can be done to improve conditions for home workers. So I think once a supply chain has been mapped, it's then about working together to say what does good employment of home workers look like for this particular supply chain? What are the gaps that may be there, and also what are the priorities? So there may be more than one gap, but in which case it makes sense to be talking with the home workers about which gap is their priority. I think in the Pentland system, the issue around transparency and setting fair piece rates was a really important issue, and we've heard how that was addressed. So there are ways of setting fair piece rates, of linking those to minimum wages and to living wages through time and motion studies, and then using simple paper-based, or potentially they could be internet-based tools to document home workers' work, and also crucially the payments that are made. I think, as we've said before, support long-term relationships with suppliers and intermediaries is really important. I think recognising the role of the agents and working out whether or not they are adding value. I mean, certainly in the Pentland case, they clearly were adding value. They were transporting leather uppers, and they were monitoring the quality of the home workers' work. They were distributing the work and doing quality control. So they need to be then paid for that work. Okay, and then finally, including home workers as active partners. And I think that's working out how to ensure access to grievance for home workers. And I think, to be honest, that is an ongoing challenge. With I know the final meeting we had with the colleagues in the Pentland supply chain, we were talking about making sure that the job cards had telephone numbers of the person in the factory that was ultimately responsible for distributing the work. Now that's not foolproof, but it could be part of a solution. Okay, last slide, please. Okay, this is really the last slide today. So this is very much really saying what we're doing now with the toolkit that we've been producing. We're encouraging brands. Basically, the Hidden Home Workers project is running now for 2 more years, and it is an opportunity for brands that want to make some moves on home working to get involved and to take up the opportunity. We're a project, we've got a team of local partners within India, Nepal and Pakistan, which means that there is that vital CSO support on the ground to engage with home workers where they're present. The toolkit can provide templates for home worker policy, and also the crucial tools that may be needed in order to document supply chains and then to work with stakeholders to make changes. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering more questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Rohan, do you want to share the questions, or I can see them now? So however you prefer, if you want to go with the questions, go with it. And I can see a couple of questions from Dave to Lucy, and there is another question in the chat box as well. So maybe you could just share these so that yeah, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. So I'll just maybe we can start with Dev's question.
Yes.
If you do you have that with you, Lakshmi?
Yes. Okay. All right. So the question to you, Lucy, is the non-disclosure of home working by brands and suppliers due to the fear of involvement of child labor and media exposure? And could a solution of women working close to home in a community center take care of this? And he has given the example of local community centers for home workers, which helped in ending child labor to some extent with homework in football in Pakistan, and of course the Mewat experiment with Gap and Next in India, which had its successes as well. So that's one question. Well, I've clubbed them for you, Lucy. And there's another one from Dietrich, which is, how do you see the way for home-based workers to be organized as trade unions? Yes, those are the two questions for you.
Okay. Okay. To respond to Dev's question, I mean, yes, I think the issue of child labour is obviously in the background. I mean, I think that's really why we invited Ines to come today, because I think her research is so interesting in that they focused on that issue and kind of directly and unpacked it a bit. The question around stitching centres, community centres involving people, I know that there are some examples where that has been tried, and I think you have to be very careful. I think there's a real range of what people mean by a stitching centre. So I think a stitching centre where it is literally on the street corner from the women can actually almost still keep an eye on their kids at home from the corner. But I mean, it is very much about looking at why, from Ines's research, why are women doing this work? Because it gives me the chance to put more time into my children. So the stitching centre has to be able to retain that flexibility, which I think is quite challenging to do. I mean, I know the football stitching in Pakistan. There are also quite a lot of documented examples of those jobs going from home workers to young men in distribution centres or small factories. And then you have to ask the question of what do the women home workers end up doing instead? So I think I'm not saying stitching centres can never work, but they have to be very carefully set up in consultation with the home workers to work out. I think they also can be issues sometimes. Women are from a particular community or a particular caste group, and they can't go to other parts of the village, or there are issues around safety. So yeah, they need to be done with a lot of careful planning. And I think, I'm not sure, I mean, I think with good transparency tools and some kind of organisation of home workers, home working can be made to work. It's not, I mean, in a way, I'm not sure that you need the stitching centre. But I'm interested to have that conversation with people. It's not...
Yeah. Thank you, Lucy. And I think that in a way indirectly comes to the, you raised a point, Dietrich, about trade unions. But I think what we are seeing very clearly is collectivization is important, and it has huge benefits wherever it happens. So it helps to bring a scattered, group together, and as we develop the capacities there, a lot of things can emerge. You also asked a question around the literacy. Does the lack of literacy in the home worker impact the job cards? And I will quickly add my kind of point, and if anyone else wants to add, please feel free. This is another benefit we have seen where you have organizations, civil society organizations, who are working directly with the workers, that even where literacy is not, as much as it should be, there are, a lot of people who are there to support the capacity building. And this could include helping them, become more literate, understanding their financial and legal rights, and making sure that they don't get exploited. So it's another huge benefit of having a responsible civil society organization engaged as a part of the multi-stakeholder grouping that works in the community. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it. But if anybody else would like to add to that as well. Lucy, maybe you?
Sorry, I was looking at the Q&A. That's not helpful.
No, that's in the chat box. But it's did you have this experience about literacy or lack of it really impacting how the job card can be used by the worker?
Yeah, I think that is an issue. I think there was usually somebody certainly this was in Tamil Nadu, where I think levels of literacy are better than in other parts of India. But I think there was usually somebody in the factory, in the household, often a child, that could help with the job card system. I think it was also interesting when we were doing the interviews with home workers, there usually was the home worker often did have some system. I mean, if she wasn't literate, she would have a way of keeping track of the work she was doing. It's just that isn't a system that's out in the open and it's not a system that's shared with the intermediary. But there often is the beginnings of a system that can be then built on.
Sure. There's another question here for you, Lucy. This is from Gisela, and she says that you said that 3.5 million home workers work in supply chains of global apparel brands. How do you know? And as home workers are hidden, it seems very difficult to find them unless suppliers are transparent, which they mostly are not. So how do you find the home workers? And I also want to say there are some other interesting comments here from Sonakshi and all. I'd encourage you to read them in the interest of time. But yes, Lucy, if you'd like to answer this question.
I mean, I think that figure comes from some research that was done by HomeNet South Asia. I mean, there are certainly, if you do interviews with home workers, oftentimes home workers can, or especially the more experienced home workers, or if you can find the home workers that are often kind of sub-agents, they will be able to either give you information about the factories that they're working for. There are often obvious differences between the things that they're making. I think, clothes that are made for domestic markets are often very different to clothes that are made for export markets. So that home workers may be able to help you with that. Yeah, I'd have to be honest, I would have to go back and look again at that study to see exactly how they reached that figure. But I mean, I think, for example, there is a study that Mark Anna did quite recently in Bangalore, where he interviewed suppliers in the garment industry. And I think he found, I think over 50, I can't remember, I think it's 58% of suppliers in a survey said that they did use home workers in a confidential survey. So that, I think a lot of suppliers are using home workers for different tasks.
Yes.
I mean, in
Thank
terms
you,
of,
Lucy.
yeah, sorry, go on.
No. I was just going to add to what you said. It's open knowledge that I think about 90% of India's workforce is still in the informal sector. And so if you sort of just do the representative math with, the apparel industry being one of the biggest employers, and then sort of, looking at the staggering numbers that are there. And by the way, a lot of these numbers are to do with where, global brands have been operating. So there are many other pockets where domestic brands operate, and this is not just in India, where information is not there. I would like to state, please go and look at the resources of HomeNet South Asia. They've done a number of researches. There are some very interesting reports, and please feel free to use those resources, as well as home workers worldwide, and all of their studies as well. So thank you very much. We're going to try and do a quick summary in the next 5 to 7 minutes. We could go on for the rest of today with this issue, because there are so many nuances, and it's an incredibly important issue, I think, for the world of work, the state of women workers. And so I now call upon Subhadra, who heads FLA here, to take over, share some of her thoughts and views, and then we shall talk about a brief way forward. So Subhadra, would you like to come in now?
Right. Thank you, Lakshmi. And I think I was engrossed in the discussion, and it was so nice to hear from all of you. And especially hearing, the brand's perspective and, their view, such positive views of, engaging with the home workers policy and fetching positive result is something which is very, very welcoming and very encouraging, for also an MSI like FLA, and as an organization, we are definitely kind of looking towards engaging with stakeholders across, and I think this whole engagement with home workers worldwide was a platform which actually helped FLA to also learn, and it has been a very good learning experience for us to look into creating a platform for our member brands to also look into and explore the issue of home workers. So I think this is just the beginning, and I know this is like the second and the last series of our webinar that we planned with Rohan and Lucy and everybody, but I think this is the platform from where we would definitely work towards more actionable points and journeys to take forward. And that is it from my side right now, Lakshmi. But at the same time, you just let me know when you want me to just summarize, and I can kind of talk about the next steps.
Sure, go ahead, go right ahead, and I'll sort of just make the final few statements. Go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lakshmi. So I think, today's presentations were pretty interesting in terms of looking at various aspects of why, we need to be a little more vigilant and more open about, home workers and looking into how it impacts. So I think Inez's presentation really helped us to understand that how homeworking is present, it is impacting children. But at the same time, what is the role? We cannot deny the fact that there are children who are engaged in homeworking. And at the same time, interestingly, what I hear is, very interesting facts like home workers actually is increased the breastfeeding aspect, which is like 84.6% respondents talked about home breastfeeding. So overall, I think, we cannot deny issues that there are child labor. At the same time, there are working, parents who are in the same environment, but looking into streamlining and engaging with them and maybe more making it more formal might kind of help us in the long run. And I think and thank you, Ines, for your presentation. It was really wonderful to hear all the research aspects, and we would like to have your presentations shared, of course. Nick, going to I think one of the most primary takeaway that I have from today's webinar is Sarah's presentation. Sarah was like so clear and so positive about how home workers policy can help a brand, and that is where I think the takeaway for most of us from this webinar. And the lines that she said that it is important to acknowledge that home workers exist in our supply chain. I think that is a very powerful line, I think, and once we acknowledge that, I think there is again a long way to go and look into various aspects, looking beyond tier 1. I mean, as an organization, in fact, we are also open to actually look into tier 1 and engage with stakeholders and looking into experience and expertise of the local stakeholders, and that has come out in everybody's presentation. Predominantly, it is clear that once we have local credible CSO engagement, that will definitely help us to bridge the gap. And interestingly, what I really liked was the benefits that are shown clearly, that long-standing supplier and brand relationship through building trust and a reliable long-standing relationship. That is what is actually important in the long run, which actually helps in various other aspects. Also, I like the job card aspect, which is of course the technicalities of how we can document, and I think this is one area where many organizations, including FLA, would like to learn more and dive deep more into looking into the entire aspect of documentation, job card, wages, record keeping, and of course looking overall into this whole mapping of beyond tier 1 supply chain mapping. So I think it was great, Sarah, and thank you especially, Sarah, for being a part of this presentation today. It was interesting. Yes, and going back to Momita brings the entire very, very flavor of Fulia and Bengal. I belong to Bengal, and I am a person who uses Fulia saris and all that. So it was so nice to hear from Momita about the whole aspect of how Seva has worked with the weavers and the master weavers in Bengal. And I think the takeaway from Momita's experience is looking at the gap between the brands and weavers, or the weavers and the workers and the brands. So bridging that gap, and where Seva played such an important role when it comes to various aspects, like looking at the subsidy, the schemes, the protection part. In fact, also the most significant thing, which is engaging with the government. Now, this is one area, Lakshmi, you'll agree with me, and Rohan will also agree with me. In India, engaging with the government, and especially in states like West Bengal, is like a humongous task. It's not easy. So I think we have much to take from Momita to look into how engagement with the government is important, and how they actually worked together to actually establish women's identity, and having them, more than 7,000, 8,000 women having identity cards for themselves. So, these, I think we, in future, when we work and look into certain aspects of working with home workers, we need to bring all these experiences together. Lucy, thank you, Momita, once again, and we look for, future collaborations, and we definitely look forward. Seva is a very, Seva is pretty well connected with FLA, and it was so nice to know Momita and hear from Momita. Lucy, thank you. It has been too good to work with Hidden Home Workers Worldwide Project, and it was great to see so strategically you've put the point that what is exactly that actually brands can do when it comes to this. And I think you've really demystified the whole concept of those challenges and those inhibitions maybe brands and suppliers would have in their mind. And as you rightly said that I like that sentence on your slide which says supply chain is complex but human rights are not. So I think and the lessons learned is, of course, we will look, and now what we will look forward is we're going to look forward to the toolkit, and I know in Cividip was actually the partner which actually helped in developing the toolkit, and FLA was also a part of that interview. And it has been a wonderful experience to kind of share about also FLA's journey. We've also worked in various projects, whether it's the AGT sustainable project in Tirupur, or it's the leather project in Agra, where we've been involved in supply chain mapping, and we have expertise and we have resources, in this. So we will definitely look forward to this toolkit and would like to kind of have a more broader understanding of it. And as I take from, Lucy's words that, where in the last slide, she talked about, current, few very important areas, what needs to be done. And I just picked up the ADA3, A, D, and A. So adopt the home workers policy, document the supply chains and record. And third is the action plan with stakeholders, credible. So that ADA, I really liked that, and I think, this, we are kind of, we look forward for collaboration and documentation. These two are very important aspects as I see when it comes to working with home workers and engage with them. So Lakshmi, not much more time, because I know it's pretty late in India and South Asia, but I think it's been wonderful. Of course, Lakshmi and Rohan, we work pretty closely together, as Lakshmi mentioned, in the WIVC platform, but we look forward to, of course, work together. And I request all members who are present here, especially our brands and suppliers, that please to explore this this area of home workers, which we know is present. Please contact these, people, the list, the names who are all there on the list. So when it comes to FLA, you can get in touch with me. And from the Hidden Home Workers Project, we have Rohan, we have Lucy, and we have Sarbani. So please feel free to contact. And I would urge all our participants to, explore and engage and find more about, issue of home workers, subcontractors, and all that. So thank you, Lakshmi. I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Subhadra. You were definitely listening in very carefully. So it's a great summary that you have put forth, and just echoing your words, I think, whenever issues look complex, and we live in a very, very complex world, the best way is to reach out for support, to collaborate. And I think the key words that came out throughout the presentation today were all about trust, transparency, collaboration, collectivization, build in local resources, and the strength of partnerships. So I think if you can just remember this and know that no matter how complex issues look, the closer we go to it, the solutions will be found. So sometimes solutions are actually closest to where the problems are. And that is why the local level of engagement helps so much in helping us, sort of find a way through the labyrinth. So once again, huge thanks to all of you who took out time to participate, to be a part of this, to share your energy. Continue to engage with us through FLA, through the Hidden Home Workers program. And we look forward to journeying, learning, and sharing with you as we move forward. Thank you once again, everybody. And a special thanks to Amandine for holding the technology together. Thank you, dear, for everything that you did.
My pleasure.
All right, so with that, we shall take your leave now, and all further engagement can happen on emails. Whoever wants presentations, please reach out to the organizing team, and I'm sure they'll help you with that. Thank you again, and have a very good evening, morning, midday, wherever you are. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.